Thanks everyone for joining us. Again, my name is Matt Cutler. I'm founder and CEO of Blocknative, and we'll be spending the next little while doing a high-level but relatively in-depth overview of all things ERC-4337, that is account abstraction. So I'm just going to go ahead here and share my screen, and we'll put this into presentation mode, and we'll jump right in. So just to sort of level set, what's the big deal about ERC-4337? It's called one of the biggest sort of user-facing upgrades to the Ethereum network since Genesis block. And 4337 has many curious properties, primarily that it improves or increases transaction programmability. Today, in the world of Ethereum, with traditional EOA transactions, they're pretty fixed and pretty well defined. Under 4337, they become much more open, much more programmable, and therefore much more expressive. So they enable all sorts of new capabilities for developers, for wallets to enable net new experiences. So all of these things really can dramatically change the user experience of using Ethereum. It also, underneath the covers, abstracts away intents, fees, authentication, social recovery. And we're not going to talk too much about that stuff today, but it's pretty interesting, sort of all the ways that 4337 impacts things. But you'll notice that typically major upgrades to the Ethereum network are called EIPs, or Ethereum Improvement Proposals, but 4337 is an ERC, request for comment. And what's interesting about it is it does all of this stuff without requiring a hard fork, without any changes to consensus. And at the outset, when 4337 started to really take off, I personally was very confused by this. How is it possible to make all of these changes to the nature of transactions, to the nature of expressiveness, to the user experience, without really changing the core protocol at all, which seems pretty fundamental? And I couldn't wrap my mind around it. I was reading papers, looking at diagrams, and really had a hard time. And I started to reach out to folks much smarter than myself in the space, much more technical, and ask them, how they were thinking about 4337. And I was sort of surprised when pretty much all of them said, yeah, I'm confused too. And what I realized at the time was that nobody really had a good mental model. Nobody had really done the work to sort of figure out how to contextualize it. And I started to do a real deep dive and say, well, how might I wrap my mind around it? How might this work? Because obviously it does. It's technically feasible. I just can't think about it the right way. And what wound up happening was, we put forward, and I'll go through now, a mental model, which really starts out with this meme from the movie Ready Player One, which is going backwards. And once I really understood that there's this point in the existing transaction lifecycle that you go backwards from, and basically all of 4337 exists in a backward-facing state, not forward, suddenly it made sense. Suddenly, everything sort of snapped into place. And as we socialized this with other folks in the category, they suggested that it really helped them understand things as well. So to level set, let's just take a look at the existing Ethereum EOA transaction flow. EOA, of course, is externally owned account, and this is private keys, right? So a user uses a non-custodial wallet. It gives them access to their own address with private keys. They use those private keys to send signed transactions to the public mempool. The public mempool then gets picked up by builders today in a post-merge, post-PBS world. Builders are outsourced folks who build blocks. Through a relay network, they then pass the transaction on to a validator who's the tip of the chain, known as the proposer. And the validator then basically says, hey, this transaction's in a block, and it becomes canonical and goes on chain. It is confirmed. There are some side steps here. Now there are private mempools. In fact, private transactions have grown from about 5% of total network traffic to, last time I looked, north of 15% of total network traffic. And what happens with a private transaction is a signed transaction goes straight to a builder without going to the public mempool. This has some favorable things like avoiding potentially MEV impact from searchers. You see this on the bottom. Some externally owned accounts go through OFAs or order flow auctions. Searchers look at the public mempool, try to extract value by manipulating ordering. They submit bundles to builders and move on. Blocknative, by the way, recently introduced a new service called Transaction Boost, which is all about really massively improving the private mempool experience. So if that's something you're curious about, protecting you or a user's transactions, please check that out. We'll talk about that a little bit at the end. But this is how things work today. Users, non-custodial wallets, EOA, signed transactions, public mempool. Great. Everybody's familiar with it. Not super complicated, fairly straightforward. Well, if you look at this diagram, you'll notice that on the left, there's this really long arrow, right? And it turns out that most of 4337 happens back there. So rather than using a non-custodial wallet to send a signed transaction via an EOA, in the world of 4337, there's this new actor, which is effectively an EOA proxy. So this is the big secret, is before you had wallets with signed transactions, and after you have signed transactions as well. They work exactly the same way, except instead of them originating with the wallet, there's these new intermediate actors who sort of help you get there. But that everything after that is kind of the same. There's these other smart contracts that help govern things like the entry point smart contract, and there's others as well. But these EOA proxies are known as bundlers, okay? And bundlers basically act as a surrogate wallet on behalf of the end user. Bundlers receive transactions from something known as the Alt-mempool. So before we had the public mempool, now we're introducing this new type of mempool called an Alt-mempool. We'll dive into this in a little bit, but it's actually a misnomer because there can be an arbitrary number of Alt-mempools, and there may wind up being many of them, which has some interesting consequences. The Alt-mempool basically will consist of 4337 intents, known technically as user ops. So an intent is basically like, hey, I would like to do this, right? My intention is to swap token A for token B, right? And basically they go into the Alt-mempool, they get picked up by a bundler, they get put into a bundle, they get submitted to the public mempool and all the way through to a builder. And basically your intent to swap turns into an actual transaction via this process, right? And then finally, of course, you have a user with a 4337 enabled wallet. Just like before, you have some side shoots out here. You also have the ability to do things like OFAs and private transactions in this world as well. So while 4337 doesn't fundamentally change sort of the construct of what a transaction is in Ethereum, and therefore doesn't need a hard fork, it does introduce a bunch of new moving parts, all of which exist upstream of where we start things today. So this is this mental model for 4337. This is why we say going backwards. And I like to say account abstraction changes everything and nothing about transacting on Ethereum. It changes everything because it fundamentally reinvents the user experience, creates a universe of new possibilities, a universe of programmability, which we'll talk about exactly what that means. But it also changes nothing. Before you had EOAs with signed transactions, and now you have EOAs with signed transactions. So it's very clever and insightful in terms of its design, and also has a lot of really positive properties in terms of the rollout because it's not dependent on a major hard fork, people upgrading their consensus layer and execution layer clients, and all the orchestration that goes on with that. In fact, it's already live, which is pretty awesome. So diving in a little bit, so providing some detail underneath the covers, right? So with a 4337 enabled wallet, the user basically, when they attempt to transact, will submit user ops to these Alt-mempools. User ops are just a binary encoded structure that look a lot like what's today an internal transaction. They have a lot of really great properties, including the ability to combine them. So for those of you who are familiar with swaps, you know the experience of first you have to authorize that a swap can occur in one transaction and pay gas, and then in a separate transaction actually do the swap, which for a new user is not intuitive and feels like they're double paying. Well, a user ops can be combined. And so you could have the approval and the swap basically get combined into one set of operations. And from a user perspective, they do it all at once. So it massively simplifies these multi-part transactions. These user ops, again, go into Alt-mempools. Now, Alt-mempools are operated by bundlers, and they're known as a higher level mempool. They might be higher level, lower level. You can decide which one you decide it to be. And there's a whole bunch of interesting things happening at the peer-to-peer layer. But as I said before, It's unclear how the alt-mempool layer will evolve. Okay, there may be one alt-mempool that all the bundlers pay attention to. There might be a bunch of them. There might be an arbitrary thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of them, as different alt-mempools have different properties, have different characteristics, have different bundlers who support them, have different advantages and disadvantages. So one of the things that many folks, including us, are really interested in is to see how the alt-mempool area progresses and evolves over time as adoption of 4337 wallets and user ops increases. One of the things that we at Blocknative think is very interesting here is that observability will go down. That as we look not just at 4337, but ahead at the Ethereum roadmap, more and more of these ephemeral data layers are being included because they have a lot of desirable properties like permissionless participation and DDoS resistance and things like that. But they really have very weak observability properties. And the thing about this is what goes on chain is what happened, but why things went on chain and the order that they did and the way that they settled is determined in these ephemeral layers, the mempool layers. And so we think it's really important to have great observability so that everybody can see what's happening at the ephemeral data layer and therefore understand why things settled the way they do, so they understand that they haven't been adversely impacted or another way biased. So we do a lot today. We have done a lot historically to provide sort of equitable access to the observability of these ephemeral data layers, and we'll be doing more in this regard. And so we think that 4337 is going to present a bunch of new challenges for the ecosystem and also opportunities for entities like Blocknative to add value to whatever you're building. Okay, moving on to the bundler. Bundlers are third-party EOA proxies. So there'll be third-party entities who operate them. In many ways, they look a lot like builders today. They're specialized entities. They're off-chain entities. They have a lot of compute. They have a lot of networking. They have a lot of storage. And they basically compete with each other to observe the alt-mempool and put together bundles. So bundlers make bundles of ordered user operations. And they're incentivized to do so because they collect the gas fees that are associated with all the user operations. So each user op has a fee associated with it because you have to incentivize a bundler to include your user op. And then also the bundler, because they control inclusion, exclusion, and ordering, they are a very likely source of MEV. Right. So bundlers may be MEV specialists who basically do their own form of MEV extraction based on what they're seeing in the alt-mempool, or they may outsource that to specialized searchers. So they would then say, hey, here's what I have. And they would work with searchers who would then bid for the opportunity to modify ordering in order to extract value from user ops. There's a whole can of worms, of course, to go in there. We're not going to go into that today, but what basically happens is 4337 then opens up a new front of opportunity for MEV extraction that, given the value that's going to be transacted here, will wind up being exploited. So that's something also to pay attention to. How exactly does MEV evolve in the 4337 space? What do the bundlers do? What do the searchers do? Do they combine, et cetera? I think we have the builder market today, which you can look at in things like Relay Scan to really get a good feel of what's likely to occur there. And then there's this other entity, which we haven't got into too much, known as a Paymaster. They're optional, but they have these really desirable properties where Paymasters can sponsor transactions and cover their gas fees. What's interesting about Paymaster is they are effectively first in the user op flow. So they have good observability properties, meaning before anyone else knows about a user op, the Paymaster has to say, I'm going to cover this one or not. There are all sorts of interesting logic that can be applied at the Paymaster level. And there's a whole universe of innovation we believe that's going to be occurring at the Paymaster because of the possibilities here. We'll talk a bit about this. So Paymasters have super desirable properties that you can now cover gas fees with any asset, not just Ether. So one of the big challenges, of course, with EOAs is there's only one way to pay for gas. That way you pay for gas is with Ether. If the user doesn't have Ether, doesn't have enough Ether, it creates all sorts of really challenging problems in the user experience. Paymasters will allow user op gas payments with any ERC-20 token, or even an off-chain payment mechanism like a credit card, or maybe even like airline miles. So Paymasters have a lot of discretion, a lot of control, a lot of optionality here to basically streamline and facilitate the fees and how fees get paid on Ethereum transactions. And you can do all sorts of cool like conditional payments. So you can say, hey, you sign up for our credit card, we'll cover your first 100 transactions to gas fees, right? Hocus pocus, user now has 100, they count down the 101st, they have to cover the gas fees. Or, hey, this Paymaster is only accessible if you have a specific NFT in your wallet. So now the NFT has value because the NFT means your gas prices get covered and you can buy, sell, trade the NFT and then move it along and have asset appreciation associated with that. And things like MEV aware Paymasters, where Paymaster might evaluate a user op, determine if there's MEV associated with it, and based on the MEV that's expected, then decide whether or not to cover the transaction. So these are just a few possibilities of the programmable nature of Paymasters and how that affects the user experience as it relates to fees of these user ops, right? So you can start to see how it creates a world of possibilities, a world of richness, but also a whole bunch of stuff to figure out. So is 4337 going to be the great unlock? Is this going to be the innovation that is going to unleash the next billion users onto the Ethereum network? And we hope that it is. We think that it might be. And we'd like to explain sort of an example of why and why we're so excited about it. So here's Alice. She's a hypothetical person, and she happens to be a super fan of a hypothetical artist known as Sailor Twift, right? She's a top listener on Spotify. She is a collector of memorabilia. She has all the albums. She participates in the online discussion forums and she posts about it. And Sailor Twift really appreciates how into her music Alice is, and wants to basically reward Alice's fandom, right? And basically provide differentiated experiences. But that's not something Ticketmaster offers today, right? So Sailor's going on a massive tour. We'll call it the Bears Tour. And Ticketmaster is not a programmable entity. They have their certain policies, and they're not going to bend over to make make things new and possible, right? And so hey, Sailor's team has a great idea. We'll make a superfan NFT. We'll give it to folks like Alice. It'll be awesome. Except there's one little problem, that in order for Alice to accept an NFT, she needs to have a crypto wallet and know how to use it and know what private keys are and all of that jazz. And chances are she's not that technical, never had a crypto wallet before, and doesn't care the first thing about crypto. All she cares about is going to a show and expressing her super fandom for Sailor Twift. Well, enter 4337, where literally any credit card number could be a account abstracted 4337 unhosted wallet. We're using Visa here as an example. It's just an illustrative example. But imagine a world where your Visa card is also a private wallet, right? An unhosted wallet, right? And imagine, well, wait, Sailor's a big artist, so she could partner with Spotify. And she could say, oh, we can airdrop this superfan NFT onto the credit card on file at Spotify, right? And so we have a partnership with Spotify. We have built-in distribution, and we have metrics and data that we can use to determine how the airdrop is going to work. And Alice can be notified from her Spotify account, hey, you have this new superfan experience you've qualified for. All you need to do is show up at the Sailor Twift venue and show your Visa credentials, right? And so maybe she shows her physical card, or maybe she shows it via her mobile device, and boom, you can verify that the NFT is there. You can verify that she owns it, and you can give her access to a differentiated experience. She also has all the advantages of it being an NFT. She can display the fact that she owns this. She could trade it she could give it to a friend, or she could sell it on the open market, right? These are all great properties of NFTs that today are locked behind. Well, you have to be up to speed. You have to have the wallet. You need to know how to use it. That under a world of 4337, the bar gets lowered dramatically, and all sorts of new interesting possibilities, new partnerships, new things occur. And the truth is Alice doesn't ever need to know that she was using Ethereum at all. doesn't even need to know about all the nuances that we in the industry care a lot about. She just knows she has a great experience with her favorite artist. Her artist is excited that they can basically really create new experiences for super fans. Spotify is excited because it allows them to deepen their relationship with their customers as well as their artists. And of course, entities like Visa, who are basically trying to facilitate transactions and facilitate commerce, are doing so as well. So this is like a win-win-win-win. Everybody is better in this world. And obviously, those of us in the Ethereum ecosystem who provide infrastructure to make this happen, we benefit as well. So this is why we call 4337 the Great Unlock, and why we're super excited for all the progress that's happening there. So, hey, in the not too distant future, we really feel like everyone's going to have a 4337 wallet. And that's going to create, a universe of possibilities and a universe of new adoption. We have been, the whole point here is, we're either going to grow the next billion users organic bottom up or inorganic top down. And I think it's going to require both, in organic bottoms up growth through killer apps and viral spread, but also top down where we just like meet the next billion users where they already are, right? That there are billions of folks who already have credit card credentials and debit card credentials. And now we can supercharge those experiences via innovations like 4337. There are also many other places where folks already are, including, brokerage accounts and loan providers and bank accounts, all of which can inherit these capabilities via things like 4337 because it abstracts away so many elements and reduces the complexity of transacting. So I think it's going to start slowly, but then move quickly once a lot of these big existing institutions that have large user bases start to realize that there's good businesses to be built here. And so we're pretty excited to be a part of that and pretty excited to watch that unfold. So we provide a whole bunch of capability in the 4337 space. And specifically today, we really help you and what you're building connect to your users via our Web3 onboard package, inspect what's going on in the public mempool and the ephemeral data layers, and provide transaction updates. And as I mentioned, via our new transaction boost offering, protect user transactions and ensure not only that they are transmitted privately, but that they settle in a rapid fashion. You have great observability along the way. You have a QR code here that you can see. You can check out all this stuff on our website at blocknative.com. And that is a crash course in understanding ERC-4337 and why we're excited about it. We do have a dedicated channel in our Discord server, and I think we have a little bit of time, and I'm happy to take any questions or comments if anybody has them. Julio, back to you, and I'm going to go ahead and stop the share.
Awesome presentation, Matt. We do have a few questions. One question is, when EOA proxies send their bundles, can they pick and choose the order of those user ops, or is the execution order reliant on the validators?
Oh, great question. So today, so I'm just going to step out a little bit. In a world of PBS, which is known as proposer builder separation, which is how Ethereum works today, the proposer, the tip of the chain, has the option to either build their own block or to outsource the block to a specialist set of third parties known as builders. And Blocknative has been a builder for about a year now. About 95% of the time, the proposer outsources to a specialist provider. And the reason why that happens is specialist providers build more valuable blocks, about 5 times as valuable blocks. So the validators are economically incented to outsource block production to outside third parties who bring a lot more CPU, bring a lot more networking, bring a lot more storage, and critically have relationships with searchers in order to build more valuable blocks. So this is why the network works the way that it does today. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why that got constructed in the first place, was to basically make it equally accessible to our participants, these sort of higher value blocks, as opposed to just the largest staking pools. To answer the question, 4337 works exactly the same way. That basically you're going to have third-party specialist bundlers whose job it is, who compete with each other to build the most valuable bundles. By building valuable bundles, they make decisions on inclusion, exclusion, and ordering. Okay. And so what happens is the bundle from a bundler is a specific set of transactions in a specific sequence with a specific price associated with it. And effectively, what will wind up happening is builders will then select the most profitable bundlers and the bundles, and they'll pass it along to the validator. So in this regard, no, the validator will not have much, if any, control over what 4337 user ops are included in what order. It is hypothetically possible that some validators will be their own bundler and their own builder, but I would suggest that that's probably not that common because it's a hard problem and it's expensive to do. And why do it yourself when there's no penalty for outsourcing it to somebody else and you'll get more money as a result? So generally the expectation is that validators will be handed blocks that contain bundles. That includes the ordering, and they'll just put them on chain.
Thank you, Matt. We have a few questions pertaining to your credit card example and how that connection between credit cards and blockchains is going to work.
So I think fundamentally what would happen in this case would be someone in the credit card supply chain would decide to enable their issued cards as 4337 wallets. So it doesn't happen magically, right? So either the card issuer or the payment network would say, hey, we have infrastructure behind the scenes that's going to associate a crypto wallet with your credit card number. Now, the universe of potential credit card numbers is very large. It's not anywhere near as large as private keys, but it's still quite large. And you could say, well, associated with your credit card is going to be a unique wallet address, right? And associated using your credit card, you can basically issue and receive user ops, right? And so what winds up happening is there's sort of a software middleware that would need to be implemented and then would make this possible. But just like today, my private key is my address, right? You can have an ENS name associated with that, and anyone can send crypto assets to that. There are certainly experiments already underway, and you're seeing certainly Visa publish a bunch of really interesting research in this regard that demonstrates how this can be made possible. So we're not there yet entirely, and it will require opt-in participation from that ecosystem. But again, if I am a credit card issuer or I am a credit card payments network, and I fundamentally want to create a great user experience that encourages transaction recency, frequency, dollar volume, and encourages a loyalty, right? Then this sort of stuff favors all of that, right? It's a whole new vista of new possible transactions, a whole new vista of ways to build meaningful relationships between consumers and their credit card credentials. And so we think on a long enough timeline, there's a lot of incentives for those entities to begin experimentation and ultimately adoption. There's a lot of regulatory questions. There's a bunch of other things we got to worry about. But fundamentally, prior to 4337, this just wasn't possible. With 4337, it is imminently possible, and actually the public experimentation is happening. So if you're curious about that, I totally recommend checking out. Visa's published a bunch of really interesting research. The woman who's really driving that, her name is Catherine Gu. She's very clever and has done some really great stuff. And they're very clearly dabbling, but they're doing so in a public fashion, and I think that's super encouraging. So we're looking forward to when those big announcements happen, but we think they're in the nearer future, not the further future.
Building on that, Matt, is 4337 an opt-in situation? How do you see 4337 evolving?
Oh, interesting question. Is it opt-in? Well, so yes, as a user, in the form of you can choose to use a 4337 enabled wallet or not. It'll be curious to see how the wallet market evolves. Will there be EOA wallets over here and 4337 wallets over here, or will there be hybrid wallets where wallets offer both sorts of capabilities? The question then is, what does the user experience look like? For the rest of the network, no, it's not going to be opt-in because they just look like transactions. And so from the POV of an application or from the POV of the network itself, signed transaction is an instruction. It gets included in a block and it goes on chain, and that's it, right? There's no decisioning that can be made based on the provenance of, this was sourced from a 4337 wallet or not. Because from the point of view of the network, there's no way to differentiate. They're just, signed transactions. How will it evolve? I think that's a very good question. I always say my crystal ball is as hazy as the next person's. I think we're seeing increase of 4337 intent volume. So user ops are going up. That's really good. I think we're seeing more and more interest from wallets, both new entrants who are pure play smart contract wallets, 4337, and existing wallets who are adding this functionality. And I think we're just starting to see some of the experimentation on what does this increased programmability mean for differentiated user experience. So I would say it's very early in the adoption cycle of 4337. And all of these things, it tends to be easy to overestimate in the short term and easy to underestimate them in the long term. So, I'm as excited as anyone to watch this play out. But, obviously, our team at Blocknative has been contributing and doing work in this area because we think that there's a lot of growth ahead. Okay.
Well, we had a few questions about paymasters. If paymasters can pay gas fees in any token, how is it decided if those tokens have liquidity and can be valuable? Are those tokens converted to ETH using any DEXs?
So it's a really good question. And so there's no magic here, right? That fundamentally an EOA needs to have its transaction feed paid in ETH, right? That's what the network expects, right? So we're not changing the rules of the network. What Paymaster does is basically say, I'll cover the ETH for the gas fees here, and I'm going to cover it using USDC out of this user's wallet, right? I'm going to cover it using a credit card charge. I'm going to cover it using miles, right? So 4337 says nothing about the liquidity or value of specific tokens. That's entirely up to the paymasters, right? And so paymaster's job, I mean, in many ways, it's like Forex, right? It's just providing an exchange service, but it's a very flexible exchange service. And you're going to have different paymasters with different policies. So you might have a paymaster which says, oh, I'll let you pay in USDC. So the only way that you can use my Paymaster is if you have sufficient USDC in your wallet to cover your fees, right? Pretty simple one, right? Or you might have a Paymaster which says, I support these 20 tokens or these 500 tokens or these 5,000 tokens, and they're making intelligent decisioning on, how many tokens they need to withdraw from your wallet in order to cover the fees that you need. Certainly for something like credit card charge or something like, miles, that's entirely off chain. But the whole point is that paymasters have and operate that infrastructure to determine, what is the appropriate number of miles to withdraw from your airline account in order to cover the 66 cents of fees that this user op is going to require, right? And again, that's what makes this programmable. That's what makes this expressive. And, I certainly don't have any monopoly on what is going to represent good ideas or good approaches here. Only that, the limitations have been, dropped a lot. And so a lot of creativity can bloom, and we're excited to see that happen.
Excellent. We are running low on time, so I'll just take two more questions. Another gas-related question. So there are already methods for gasless transactions using meta transactions today. So why 4337?
Oh, so I don't want to get into the pros and cons, but at the end of the day, 4337, I think, really comes from the point of view of privileging the user experience. That meta transactions are a thing, but they're complicated. They're complicated to use, complicated to explain, complicated to understand, and there's no real easy and obvious way to deal with it. What I think 4337 and account abstraction smart contract wallets do is just insulate the user from all of that, sort of bundle this all together into a coherent experience, right? And it's so easy to undervalue user experience until you use a great user experience and you go, oh, the traditional way of doing things is terrible, and this is so much better. And you know what? It's so much better. I'll actually maybe pay a higher price for a better experience, right? And we see that throughout the economy, we see that throughout society. And so in many ways, certainly 4337 is built on the abstractions, enabled by meta transactions, but just several generations of evolution on top and a much more complete approach. Is it the end all be all? By no means, right? I mean, certainly this is an area of rapid innovation, but it's a massive step forward and a massive unlock. And I personally would not bet against it. I think there is a lot of debate as how fast will it grow, when will it take, all that sort of jazz. That's definitely TBD, but it seems relatively inevitable that there will be a sizable percentage of all transactions moving forward that will be using the concepts of 4337 that we discussed today.
And wrapping up, what challenges do you see with the adoption of 4337?
I mean, at the end of the day, people need an incentive to transact. Like, what do they want to do, right? And so as much as we can streamline the experience, it still has to be something that consumers want to engage in. This is why we gave the example of, the Sailor Twift thing, because it seems you don't need to think very hard about that would be desirable. That would be something someone wants to do, right? And so, my view is we're about to embark on a new era of expressiveness and creativity in terms of, we're making transactions themselves programmable. Like, forever since the dawn of transactions are what we're told they can be. This is what a stock transaction is. This is what a real estate transaction is. This is what a credit card transaction is. And there are these atomic things with rules defined by outside parties. That's melting away. That's going away. Now the transaction itself is programmable. How a transaction behaves, what its components are, how it gets paid for, how fast it goes, its privacy properties. All of that is open for programmability, and that's super fascinating. And so, my sense is there's a really big design space. I like to say it's like painting with a new set of colors. Like, here's some new colors. What kind of paintings can you paint? You're like, gosh, I don't know. I gotta experiment a little bit. And after some time, you go, well, I started out painting sort of the same sort of paintings I was painting before, but once I really got familiar with what these new colors could do, it turned out there was whole new avenues and there's entirely new categories of paintings that weren't possible without these new colors. I think that's what's going to happen with 4337. We're going to see experiences that just aren't in the imagination today, aren't in the thinking, aren't possible, and those being really engaging for users and inspiring for builders and unlocking a whole wave of innovation. So that's how I think about all this stuff. Obviously, I'm an enthusiast for it, and I'm really excited to see what everybody on this call winds up doing and building, and excited to see how this category evolves. We, of course, at Blocknative are really focused on ensuring observability for everybody and ensuring privacy of transactions and orderly settlement. And so to the extent that you're doing stuff in this space and you care about that sort of thing, by all means, reach out. We'd love to engage with you and talk about what we have today, what's coming down the line, and ways that we can help you build bigger, better, faster. Okay. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Julio, for having me.
Thank you, everybody. We do have one transaction boost question, Matt. Do you have to pay for the privilege of sending your transactions through Transaction Boost?
No. Transaction Boost is a private RPC aggregator that anyone can add to their wallet. If you are a wallet and want to provide this to your users, we'd love to talk. So our objective is to make Transaction Boost as accessible to the ecosystem as possible. You can read all about it. It's fully documented on our website. And the promise of Transaction Boost is fully private transactions with rapid settlement and identical observability to what you get with a public mempool transaction. And so what we've heard from various parties is private transactions are great, but they come with a lot of compromises as it relates to user experience. And so the whole point of Transaction Boost is all the benefits with none of the compromises. And arguably, we're going to be publishing some data potentially even better settlement than using any other single point provider, or using the public mempool. So there's a lot of really compelling things happening in that world. We're just getting started. We have a very rich development roadmap underway there. And we do encourage folks to check out Transaction Boost. It's the best thing to happen to your wallet since 4337. Okay.
Thank you. We have way more questions than we can answer on this call. I will be sure to gather them all and post a little Q&A on our Discord, so be sure to join that if we weren't able to get to your questions today. Recordings will be sent out by end of week. Until then.